The season finale of Becoming Elizabeth sees us fast forwarding 2 months from the end of the last episode, where we saw Edward VI coughing up blood. The king appears to be dying. There's a power struggle between Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, the former Lord Protector, and his successor John Dudley, but also between Edward's half-sisters Mary and Elizabeth. And then, wham bam, Edward is standing there. Surprise! I'm alive, and you're all in big trouble. One of you in huge trouble. I think that about covers it. But is any of that true? Well, let me, historian and best-selling author Claire Ridgway, enlighten you. I have to say that I thoroughly enjoyed this episode. One, because it saw some fine acting, particularly from John Heffernan as Edward Seymour and Jamie Parker as John Dudley. Two, because it was just so very fictional and so I could relax more. And three, because it was so very dramatic and entertaining. I was slightly disappointed that we didn't have Elizabeth, becoming queen by a red wedding scenario, Game of Thrones, arranging a banquet to celebrate something and then killing everyone. But hey ho, Edward's surprise was well played, and they've set it up well for a second season, with Lady Jane Grey being called to court and Edward vomiting blood at the end. We had all been wondering about Jane, hadn't we? As you know, the timeline has bothered me, not entirely because it's so warped from a historical point of view, but because the show can't even seem to keep in time with itself. It is very confused. Writer Anya Rice has purposely not bothered with the timeline. On Twitter, she wrote, "We do follow some self-imposed authenticity, but linear time is not one of them." Fair enough, it's a fictional drama inspired by history. But the timeline of the show itself, how sometimes it's so grindingly slow and then incredibly action-packed, and then we skip months and haven't got a clue what happened in those months, that's annoyed me. Oh well. But let's get to the storyline of episode 8 and compare it to real history. We've had a dying Edward who bounces back. But did that happen? Well, in 1552, as I've said before, Edward was ill with smallpox and measles, but after 12 days of illness, he was recovering well, and there didn't seem to be any real concern about him at any time. This bout of illness did seem to weaken him, though. In January 1553, he came down with a cough, and in February 1553, when Mary visited him, she found him bedridden. He rallied at various points, although not as dramatically as in the show. But at the end of May, he was described as wasting away daily. He just got worse and worse, and he finally died on the 6th of July. But what about a power struggle between Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, and John Dudley, and then Mary and Elizabeth? Well, there was a struggle between the two men, but it wasn't when Edward was ill. Just as in the show, John Dudley had released his old friend Somerset from the Tower and had him restored to the Privy Council. And at that point, Somerset, as historian Chris Skidmore points out, did take sides and sided with Mary. He thought that Mary should be given her religious freedom and be able to hear Mass in her own household. And after a delegation of men was sent to her home to order her chaplains to desist from saying Mass, and 3 of her household were sent to the Tower, Somerset did begin plotting Dudley's downfall. Unfortunately for Somerset, Dudley got wind of it, and it was alleged that Somerset had even plotted to have him assassinated. Somerset was arrested and thrown in the Tower. However, he didn't plot to put Mary on the throne. That's fiction. And rather than being imprisoned 1 minute and executed the next, there were 3 months between his arrest and execution, and he was given a trial. He was acquitted of treason, but found guilty of felony. He was sentenced to be hanged, but this was commuted to beheading, and he was beheaded on Tower Hill on the 22nd of January 1552. Like in the series, the common people do seem to have liked Somerset. Outside his trial, they were heard to be chanting, "God save the Duke," and they celebrated after he was acquitted, not realising that sentencing was incomplete. And a contemporary account of his execution mentions the many weeping eyes among the spectators. Something strange happened at his execution too. Chronicler Charles Risley writes that there was such a fear and disturbance among the people suddenly before he suffered that some tumbled down the ditch and some ran towards the houses thereby and fell, that it was marvel to see and hear. But how the cause was, God knoweth. Some people thought that a pardon had come, but sadly not. Somerset made a speech in which he stated, "I am come hither to die, but a true and faithful man as any was unto the King's majesty and to his realm." And he died with courage and dignity, being beheaded thankfully with one blow of the axe. So that was in January 1552, before King Edward VI had even come down with smallpox and measles. And what about Mary and Elizabeth? Was Elizabeth considering herself as a candidate for the throne? Did John Dudley turn to her? No, there's absolutely no suggestion of that. Edward VI may have been dying in 1553, but he was lucid and he made his own plans for the succession. He wrote his device for the succession in which he stipulated that the crown would descend through the male heirs of his cousin Frances Grey, Duchess of Suffolk, Lady Jane Grey's mother, if Edward died childless. He ruled his sisters out of the succession due to the annulments of their parents' marriages and their illegitimate status, and he passed over the Stuart line just as his father had done in his will. When it became clear that Edward was not long for this world and Frances Grey was not going to have a son anytime soon, he changed his device and made Frances's eldest daughter, the newly married Lady Jane Grey, as his heir. Jane had married John Dudley's son Guildford. She was young and she had a good chance of having a son to pass the throne on to in time. Edward's device didn't have time to go to Parliament before he died, but it was issued as letters patent for the limitation of the Crown, having been drawn up by Sir Edward Montague, Chief Justice of the Common Pleas, and John Gosnold, Solicitor General of the Court of Augmentations. Edward's device obviously led to the succession crisis of July 1553, which we may well see if Becoming Elizabeth has a second season. Spoiler, Mary rallies support for her claim to the throne and manages to overthrow Jane rather quickly. Elizabeth just wasn't a player at this time. She tried to arrange a visit to see her brother in February 1553, but was refused. She was very much in the background at this time, and John Dudley did not look to her as an alternative successor, and Robert Dudley had been married to Amy Robsart since 1550. So, as you can see, this episode was rather fictional. In an interview with Decider.com, writer Anya Rice explains her reasoning behind having Edward bounce back from death, saying, "It feels like a really important thing to explore, and that thing of everyone showing their cards and everyone shown how ruthless they are." When he suddenly recovers, Rice explains that everyone tries to cram it back in the box, pretending it didn't happen again. She talks about the scene between Mary and Elizabeth on the stairs, calling it the first honest conversation they have, and adding, "It's really meant to be that last scene where you just suddenly go like, oh, there's the Elizabeth we know. There's the Elizabeth and Mary we know." But then I have to disagree with that, as Elizabeth just wasn't a contender. She wasn't putting herself forward at this time. But in fiction, you can do what you like. And we know that others, think of Wyatt's Rebellion in 1554, saw Elizabeth as an alternative to Mary. There were some great scenes in this finale, and I will watch a second season if it's made, but I have mixed feelings about the series as a whole. I don't think it's been as compelling as the real historical story, but that's just me. And I don't think Elizabeth has become, in inverted commas. What do you think? I'd love to hear your views, so do share them as comments. Thank you for spending time with me, and I'm sure I'll be back soon. Take care. Bye bye.